in our conversations with Justin and Jay, we talked a lot about scoring the psychology of the show rather than the period and the place. So, and when I say psychology, I kind of mean of the audience as well as of the characters. I think we felt as though we wanted the audience to feel the same sense of unease that the crew of the Erasmus feel when they wash up on the shores of Japan, a place which the great majority of the crew probably didn't really believe existed. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think we felt as though going too traditional would allow the audience to feel comfortable, like, oh, we're in Japan. I get what's going on here. You know what I mean? We wanted to kind of be the opposite of that.
So you wanted us to be unsettled from the
beginning. Essentially, yes. So that was one thing that we took into account. And I would say that when we first started working with Taro, those early sessions were not, it definitely wasn't, hey, we've written this piece on our piano, play it on your instrument. You know, that's not what it was. It was more of like exploratory, in the sense of like, we want to hear Gagaku ensembles and we want to understand the way they interact and the ranges of the instruments. Essentially,
did you write with them with those instruments in mind, or was it more amorphous than that?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, you go ahead, Nick.
We wrote some pieces with them specifically in mind because they have a different tuning system than the Western system.
That's interesting. How did you deal with that?
Without getting too scientific, but an A in Western music is at 440 cycles per second, and an A in Gagaku music is at 430. So everything we would put, if we put what we did against it, it would sound sharp and out of tune. So we actually did write some sketches where we detuned all our synthesizers down to match their tuning system, so that when they would receive the files and improvise over it, it would all kind of match. So yeah, I think we wrote like, we tried to write like these landscapes for them to sort of improvise over, and then we would take that and manipulate it on our end and then sort of collage it together.
At what point then in the whole process were you guys doing this? Were they already editing episodes? Were you seeing footage at this point, or does this predate all that?
I think it predates it. It's a little bit vague in my mind. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think
remember when we started with Taro.
It predates and leading in. I think, like, you've got to remember that Shōgun was a particularly unusual TV show, or at least in my experience. I don't have loads of experience, but the experience I do have, and it was much more like a 10-hour movie in terms of the process, because one wasn't writing to try and catch the date of airing. Everything was written, and there were so many effects to do and stuff that it all ended up being mixed and written toward that notion of a 10-hour movie. Like, I've worked on a show where you don't know what is going to happen in episode 10 when you're doing episode 1. That wasn't the case here, which I think allowed for a level of detail on our part that isn't normally afforded. And toward the kind of Japanese aspect, to me, it was always about, like, one has to acknowledge the place and the time on a cellular level. And I think that's where the kind of instrumentation, although we can get into how it affected themes and stuff, but there's a sort of cellular level that, yes, it has period appropriate elements, but the score itself is working on an entirely different level simultaneously, which is much more to the character. And as you know from watching the show, it's often about what's not being said rather than what is being said.